The letter hit Marcus Lavelle's desk at 6:47 in the morning, and by 7:03, he was already on a plane. Marcus was Harry's lead American communications advisor, 42 years old, the kind of man who had worked press rooms in Washington and London without blinking. He had survived 2 international media storms and 1 catastrophic week in Brussels. He did not overreact. He did not board flights based on hunches. He boarded this one before he had even finished reading the document. The memo had been routed through 2 separate London legal firms and time-stamped before dawn. 4 pages. On the surface, it looked like a standard compliance request, clean, formal, the kind of paperwork a person could misread as routine. But Marcus had seen this specific language exactly once before, 12 years ago, such in a briefing that ended a senior advisor's career in 48 hours. The phrase used then, and again now, was constitutional adjacency risk. Back in Montecito, Harry stood in his kitchen at 7:15 in the morning, still in the gray shirt he had slept in. His coffee sat cold on the counter. He hadn't touched it. His eyes stayed locked on the single printed page his legal team had forwarded to his tablet the night before. The same document Marcus was now carrying across an ocean. Harry had read it 6 times. Every time, he reached the sentence in the 3rd addendum, and every time his jaw tightened, not from shock, from recognition. Hi, viewers. I want to ask you something before we go further. If you found out that a life you built from scratch, carefully, legally, they saw brick by brick, was being quietly reviewed by an institution you thought you had already walked away from, what would you do in that first hour? Leave your honest answer in the comments right now, because what Harry does in the next 60 minutes is going to change the shape of this entire story.
The $37 million plan belonged to Deja Whitmore. She was their chief strategy architect, meticulous, sharp, and the kind of professional who vetted every clause twice before signing her name to anything. She had spent 11 months constructing a framework of philanthropic ventures and media partnerships so carefully structured that her exact word to Harry 3 weeks earlier had been, "We are clean." Harry had believed her. He had no reason not to. Clean. That was the word she used. Then his phone buzzed once. A message from Marcus, already airborne. Do not respond to anything until I arrive. Do not contact the palace. Do not call William. And Harry, do not let Deja see the 3rd addendum yet. Harry read that last line again, then a 3rd time. As Marcus Lavelle, the man who had never once told him to hide something from his own team, was telling him to do exactly that. Whatever was buried in that 3rd addendum was not just a legal issue. It was the kind of information that once known could not be undone, and someone on the other side of the Atlantic had already decided it was time for Harry to know it. Marcus Lavelle landed at LAX with 1 carry-on bag, no checked luggage, and a folder he had not let out of his hand since London. He did not stop for coffee. He did not check his phone for messages. He walked straight through the terminal, straight to the black SUV idling at the curb, and the moment the door closed behind him, he opened the folder again, not because he had forgotten what was in it, but because he needed to be absolutely certain he had read it correctly before he sat across from Harry and said the words out loud. He had read it correctly. The drive from the airport to Montecito took 94 minutes. Marcus spent 80 of them in silence, watching the Pacific Coast Highway unspool outside the window. The ocean flat and gray and indifferent to everything happening inside that car. He had made this drive before under pressure, never under pressure like this. Harry met him at the door before Marcus had even reached the front steps. That told Marcus everything. Harry had been watching the driveway, had probably been watching it for the last 2 hours. His face was composed, the practiced composure of a man trained from childhood to keep his expression neutral in public, but his eyes gave him away. There was something in them that Marcus recognized immediately. Not fear, not anger. The specific look of a person who already knows the answer to the question they are about to ask and is hoping, against everything rational, to be proven wrong. Marcus stepped inside. He set the folder on the kitchen table. He did not sit down. Hi, viewers. I need to pause right here and ask you something directly. Have you ever been in a room where someone is about to tell you something that changes everything, and the silence before they speak feels heavier than the words themselves? Drop a yes or no in the comments right now, because what Marcus is about to put on that table is the reason this story exists. The folder contained 3 items. The first was the original compliance memo, the 4-page document Harry had already read 6 times the night before. The second was a supplementary legal analysis prepared by Marcus's own London contact, a woman named Rochelle Okafor, who had spent 20 years inside British institutional frameworks before moving to private advisory work. Rochelle did not prepare supplementary analyses for routine matters. She had told Marcus on the phone at 5:30 that morning, her voice flat and careful. This one required context that the original document deliberately left out. The third item was a single printed email chain. Harry looked at the folder, then at Marcus. He said nothing. Marcus tapped the email chain. 2 pages. 12 exchanges between addresses Harry did not immediately recognize, until the third line, but where one name appeared that made the kitchen feel 10 degrees colder. It was not William's name. It was the name of William's office director, a man named Gerald Ashworth, a career palace administrator who had been managing institutional communications for over 2 decades. A man who did not send emails about anything unless the matter had already been reviewed, approved, and decided at a level far above his own. Gerald Ashworth had sent the first email in that chain 14 days ago. 14 days ago, Harry and Meghan had been at a philanthropic gala in San Francisco. They had given a keynote address. The room had given them a standing ovation. The coverage had been warm and wide. By every visible measure, the $37 million framework was gaining momentum. Every partnership signal was positive. Every media indicator pointed forward. And 14 days ago, the same week as the standing ovation, the same week Deja Whitmore had told Harry they were clean, Gerald Ashworth had begun a quiet, private, institutional conversation about the framework that Harry's team knew absolutely nothing about. Deja appeared in the kitchen doorway. She looked at the folder on the table. She looked at Marcus. Something shifted in her expression, quick, controlled, but Marcus caught it. He had spent 20 years reading rooms for a living. Deja Whitmore was not someone who walked into spaces unprepared. She had prepared for this meeting. She had known, or suspected, that Marcus's arrival meant something specific. Marcus looked at Harry. Harry gave the smallest nod. Marcus slid the email chain across the table toward Deja. She read the first page, standing up. But halfway through the second page, she sat down. Not because she was tired, because her legs had made the decision for her. The involuntary response of a body absorbing information the mind has not yet fully caught up to. She set the paper down. She looked at Harry. She said 3 words. How long ago? Harry said, 14 days. The silence that followed was not the silence of people who had nothing to say. It was the silence of 3 professionals in a room, each one calculating, separately, rapidly, and with rising unease, exactly what it meant that an institution had been moving against their framework for 2 full weeks without a single visible sign. No confrontation, no warning, no leak to the press, nothing that could have been intercepted, flagged, or countered. Just silence. And movement underneath it. Rochelle Okafor's supplementary analysis was 11 pages long. Marcus had marked 3 sections. The first explained the specific legal mechanism that the compliance memo had activated. The second explained what that mechanism, once activated, was designed to produce. The third, the one Marcus had read 4 times on the plane, explained who, within the institutional structure, had the authority to initiate it. The answer to that third section was not ambiguous, and it was not Gerald Ashworth. Whatever was happening had not started in an administrator's inbox. It had started somewhere above that, somewhere that required a different order of decision-making entirely. And the name that lived at that level of decision-making was one that none of the 3 people sitting in that Montecito kitchen were ready to say out loud. Not yet. Deja Whitmore had not slept. It was 4:22 in the morning when she sat down at the glass desk in her hotel room 12 minutes from Harry's house, opened her laptop, and pulled up every document she had ever filed in connection with the $37 million framework. Every trademark application, every partnership structure, every philanthropic trust filing, every investor memo. She had been staring at them for 3 hours, not looking for errors. She had already checked for errors a dozen times, but looking for the specific thing that Rochelle Okafor's supplementary analysis said was there. A pattern, not a mistake, not a legal violation. A pattern of positioning that, when viewed from inside a certain institutional framework, told a story that Deja had never intended to tell. And she found it on page 47 of her own master document at 4:38 in the morning, and when she found it, she closed her laptop, stood up, walked to the window, and stood there for a full 4 minutes without moving. She had built something airtight. She knew she had. Every individual component of the $37 million framework was clean, legal, and defensible. But Rochelle's analysis had done something Deja had not done. It had laid every component side by side in sequence. The trademark expansions, the trust restructuring, the investor language, the media partnership framing, and read them not as separate filings, but as a single cumulative statement. And that cumulative statement, read from London, read through the lens of constitutional protocol, said something that made Deja's stomach drop straight to the floor. As it said, "We are building a competing version of the crown. Not deliberately, not maliciously, but structurally, in the architecture of how the brand had been positioned, in the language used to describe Harry and Meghan's public role, in the way the philanthropic framework had been designed to carry international institutional weight. The plan had assembled, piece by piece, something that looked from the outside like a parallel royal structure operating on American soil. Deja had not built that on purpose, but purpose in institutional law is not the standard. Perception is." Marcus arrived at her hotel at 6:15 in the morning with 2 coffees and the expression of a man who had also not slept. He sat across from her at the small table by the window. He did not ask her what she had found. He already knew. Yea, he had read Rochelle's analysis 4 times. He waited. Deja said, "They are not wrong." 3 words, and every ounce of the 11 months she had spent building the framework was somewhere inside them, compressed, heavy, and irreversible. Marcus wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. Outside, the California morning was beginning to lighten at the edges of the sky, the darkness pulling back in slow, reluctant degrees. He had been in enough crisis rooms to know that the moments right before dawn were always the most honest. The time when the instinct to manage the story gave way to the need to understand it. He said, "So what does that mean for Harry?" Deja turned back to the window. "It means the institution has a legitimate basis for the review. It means the compliance memo is not leverage, it is a finding. And it means that if Harry wants to continue building what we built, he has 2 options." She paused. Marcus said, "Tell me." "Option 1, Deja said, "is structural dismantling. We redesign the entire framework from the foundation. Remove every element that carries institutional weight. Reduce the scope, reduce the language. Accept a version of independence that is significantly smaller than what we planned." The silence that followed that sentence was long enough to be its own answer. "Option 2, she said. Marcus looked at her. "Option 2 is full separation. Harry relinquishes everything still connected to the title. Every residual honorary designation, every symbolic association, every remaining thread that ties the brand to the crown. He severs it completely, publicly, and permanently, and in doing so, that removes the institutional basis for the review entirely, because you cannot have constitutional adjacency risk if there is no constitutional adjacency." Marcus set his coffee down. He had known, on some level, since he read Rochelle's analysis on the plane, that the conversation was always going to arrive at this exact point. But knowing something is coming and sitting in the room when it arrives are 2 completely different experiences. He said, "Has anyone told Harry yet?" Deja shook her head. "I wanted to be certain before I walked back in that house." "Are you certain now?" She picked up her coffee. Her hands were steady, the hands of someone who had delivered difficult assessments to powerful people before and understood that steadiness, in those moments, was not a luxury. It was a professional obligation. "Yes," she said. "Sheila, I am certain." Marcus nodded once. He picked up his phone. He typed a message to Harry, 5 words. We need to meet. Now. The reply came back in under 30 seconds. A single word. Ready. Harry had been awake too. Of course he had. The drive back to the house took 11 minutes. Neither Marcus nor Deja spoke during those 11 minutes. There was nothing left to say in the car. Everything that needed to be said was waiting inside that house, at that kitchen table, in a conversation that none of them could walk back from once it started. Deja stared at the road ahead. She thought about the 11 months. She thought about the standing ovation in San Francisco. She thought about the word she had used 3 weeks ago. The word she had chosen with confidence and delivered without hesitation. Clean. She had believed it when she said it. That was the part that made it so hard to carry. Not that she had been careless, but that she had been careful, thorough, and still arrived at the wrong destination. The car pulled into Harry's driveway. The front door opened before they reached the steps. Harry was standing in the doorway again, same as the morning before. Same composed face, same eyes that told the real story. But there was something different this morning. Something in the set of his shoulders, in the particular stillness of a man who has spent the night making peace with a decision he has not yet announced. Deja looked at him, and she understood, before a single word was spoken, that Harry already knew what she was about to tell him. He had known since 3 o'clock that morning. He had just been waiting for someone to confirm it. Harry poured 3 cups of coffee without being asked. That was the detail Deja noticed first. Not his expression, not his posture. The coffee. He moved through the kitchen with the quiet efficiency of a man who had already accepted that this was going to be a long conversation and had decided, sometime in the hours before dawn, to meet it with his hands occupied. It was the kind of motion that had nothing to do with hospitality and everything to do with control. Small, deliberate, physical control over the only thing in the room that was still manageable. He set the cups on the table. He sat down. He looked at Deja first, then Marcus. Then he said, "Tell me what you found." Not tell me what happened. Not explain the situation. Tell me what you found. The precision of that phrasing told Marcus everything about where Harry's head was. He was not asking for comfort. He was not asking for options framed gently. He was asking for the truth, stated plainly, without the cushioning that advisors instinctively wrap around difficult findings when they are afraid of the reaction. Deja opened her laptop. She turned it to face him. She walked him through it exactly the way she had walked herself through it at 4:38 in the morning. The trademark filings, the trust restructuring, the investor language, the media partnership framing. Each piece clean on its own. Each piece legitimate in isolation, all of it assembled into something that the institutional review had read as a single cumulative statement. She did not soften the conclusion. She said, from their perspective, what we built looks like a parallel structure, not legally, not intentionally, but structurally and symbolically. When you lay every component side by side, the pattern carries institutional weight that the compliance framework was designed to flag. Harry listened without interrupting. He did not look away from the screen. He did not shift in his seat. He sat with the information the way a person sits with something they already knew was coming, not absorbing it for the first time, but allowing it to settle into the shape it had already been forming in the back of their mind for days. When Deja finished, the kitchen was quiet for a long moment. Then Harry said, "How long have they been watching it build?" Marcus said, "Based on the email chain, at least 4 months. The formal review was only triggered 2 weeks ago. But the observation started earlier. Rochelle believes the first internal flag was raised around the time of the San Francisco Gala." Harry looked at the table. The San Francisco Gala, the standing ovation. The week Deja had told him they were clean, and he had believed her, and the momentum had felt real and solid and earned. That same week, somewhere inside an institutional framework 8,000 miles away, someone had been quietly watching the momentum and deciding what to do about it. He picked up his coffee. He took one slow sip. He set it down. He said, "What are the options?" Deja told him, the same 2 options she had laid out for Marcus in the hotel room at 6 in the morning. Structural dismantling, a reduced, redesigned framework stripped of its institutional weight. or full separation, a complete, public, as permanent severance of every remaining connection to the title, the designation, the symbolic architecture of the crown. She laid both out without editorializing. She gave him the full picture of what each option would cost and what each option would preserve. She did her job. When she finished, Harry was quiet again. Not the quiet of someone processing, the quiet of someone who had already processed, who had sat with both options in the dark between 3 and 6 in the morning and had already traveled the full length of each path in his mind, had already stood at the end of each one and looked at what was waiting there, and had already felt, in his chest and his gut and the specific part of himself that had nothing to do with strategy, which one he could live with. Marcus watched him. As 20 years in this work had taught Marcus to read the moment right before a decision is spoken out loud. There was a particular quality to the silence of a person who has decided but not yet said it. A stillness that is different from uncertainty. A kind of internal arriving that changes the air in the room in a way that is impossible to describe but impossible to miss. He was watching that silence right now. Hi viewers, I want to stop here for just a second and ask you something. Have you ever had to choose between protecting something you built and protecting who you are? Not a compromise. A real choice, where you could not have both. Drop your answer in the comments. Because what Harry says next is not just a strategic decision. It is the most personal thing he has said in this entire story. Harry looked at Deja. He said, if we dismantle the framework, if we strip it back, reduce the scope, remove the institutional language, how much of what you built survives? Deja was honest. 40%, maybe 45%. The core philanthropic structure survives. The media partnerships survive in a reduced form. The financial architecture stays intact, but the international reach, the institutional credibility, the scale of what we were building, that does not survive a structural dismantling. What comes out the other side is a much smaller operation. Harry nodded slowly. He said, and if I separate completely, if I remove every remaining connection to the title, every designation, every thread, how long does that take to execute properly? Marcus said, Rochelle estimates 4 to 6 weeks for the legal restructuring, as if the public statement could be released independently of the legal process. The statement itself could be issued whenever you decide you are ready. Harry nodded again. He was quiet for 10 seconds. 15. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed on the road outside. Somewhere in the house, a door shifted in a draft. Then Harry said, I am not going to dismantle what Deja built. The room did not react visibly, but the air changed. I spent 3 years finding a way to exist that did not require me to be half of something I could not fully commit to. I am not going back to that. I am not going to build something that works at 40% and call it independence. That is not what any of this was for. He looked at Marcus. Draft the separation statement. I want to review it by the end of the week. Marcus said, and Meghan, Harry said, I will tell her tonight. He said it the way a person says something they have already rehearsed. Not because it would be easy, but because they have already decided that easy is no longer the standard they are measuring against. Deja closed her laptop. She looked at her coffee cup. She thought about 11 months of work and 40% survival rates and the standing ovation in San Francisco and the word she would probably spend a long time unpacking. Clean. Nothing about this room, this morning, this decision felt clean. But it felt true. And in that moment, as sitting in Harry's kitchen with the California light coming through the windows and the weight of an irreversible choice settling into the silence between 3 people who had all lost something this week, true was the only thing left that mattered. Marcus picked up his phone. He opened a new document. He typed 2 words at the top of the blank page. Words that once turned into a full statement and released into the world would close a chapter of Harry's life that had been open in one form or another since the day he was born. He did not type the words out loud. He did not need to. Everyone in that room already knew what they were. If this story is hitting different, you already understand why it matters. Subscribe to this channel right now and turn on every notification, because next is the one where the private conversation happens. The conversation between 2 brothers that nobody was supposed to hear about. No advisors, no legal teams, no carefully managed language. Just Harry and William, on a call that one of them had been avoiding for weeks and the other had been waiting for. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Leave your thoughts in the comments and come back, because that conversation does not go the way anyone expected. The call lasted 23 minutes. There was no record of it on any official calendar. No aide had scheduled it. No communications team had prepared talking points for either side. No palace press officer had been briefed in advance. Shall it happen the way things between brothers sometimes happen? Not through channels, not through intermediaries, not through the careful institutional machinery that had managed every other interaction between these two men for the past 4 years, but through a direct dial at 9:47 on a Wednesday night. When Harry picked up his personal phone and typed a number he still knew by heart, William answered on the second ring. Harry noticed that. He always noticed that. Not the first ring, never the first, because the first ring was reactive, and William did not do reactive, but the second. The second ring was the rhythm of a man who had seen the name on the screen, taken one breath, and then picked up. It was the pace of someone who had been expecting the call, possibly for weeks. For the first 90 seconds, they spoke about nothing. The weather in London. A brief, careful exchange about the children. The kind of conversation that two people have when they are both circling the real conversation and giving each other the courtesy of arriving at it without being pushed. It was not dishonest. It was the specific language of people who had once known each other completely and now had to navigate the distance between that version of their relationship and this one. Then William spoke. He did not raise his voice. He did not reach for the accumulated grievances of the past 4 years. He did not open with an accusation or a warning or a statement of institutional position. He opened with 6 words, delivered in a tone so measured and so direct that the absence of emotion in them was itself a form of emotion. He said, "Harry, you cannot keep doing this." Harry said nothing. Aunt William continued, "You left. I accepted that. The family accepted that. The institution made its adjustments and it moved forward because that is what it does. But what is being built out there, what your team has been constructing for the past year, is not independence. It is something else. And the people whose job it is to protect this family and this institution are not going to keep watching it without responding." Harry's jaw tightened. He was standing in the hallway outside the bedroom, his back against the wall, his free hand pressed flat against the cool plaster. He said, "What we are building is legal. Every component has been reviewed." William said, "I know it is legal. That is not what I said." The distinction landed exactly the way William had intended it to land. Legal and acceptable were not the same thing. They had never been the same thing inside the framework Harry had grown up in. The institution did not primarily operate on the basis of what was legally permissible. It operated on the basis of what was symbolically coherent. What was legally sound could still fracture something that had taken centuries to construct. And William was not calling to discuss legality. He was calling to discuss fracture. Harry said, "So, what are you asking me to do?" William was quiet for 3 seconds. Then he said, "I am asking you to understand what you are actually holding. You still carry the designation. You still carry the association. And everything you build under that association carries institutional weight whether you intend it to or not. You cannot use the architecture of something and simultaneously claim to be separate from it. It does not work that way. It has never worked that way." Harry said, "And if I remove the designation completely?" Another pause. Shorter this time. William said, "Then you are out. Fully. Finally. And whatever you build after that has nothing to do with this family institutionally. You would be free to build whatever you want." The word free landed in a strange place. Harry turned it over in his mind. Free. The thing he had been reaching for since Megxit. The thing the $37 million framework had been designed to create. And here was his brother, the future king, the man on the other side of every institutional decision that had shaped Harry's entire adult life, using that exact word and meaning it, Harry believed, in the most precise and literal sense. Not as a threat, not as a dismissal, as a statement of structural fact. Yeah, you can be free, but free means out, and out means all the way out. Harry pushed off the wall. He walked to the window at the end of the hallway. The Montecito night was dark and still, the hills black against a sky full of stars, the kind of sky that made everything feel both enormous and manageable at the same time. He said, "I need you to understand something, William." William said nothing. He was listening. "I did not leave because I stopped caring about the family. I did not leave because I wanted to damage the institution. I left because staying was costing me things I could not afford to keep losing. And I am not going to apologize for that decision. Not to you, not to anyone." William said, "I know." 2 words. And inside those 2 words was something Harry had not expected. Not agreement, not absolution, but acknowledgement. Plus the specific acknowledgement of a man who had watched his brother struggle from the other side of an institutional wall and had never found the right moment or the right language to say, "I see it. I have always seen it." Even when I could not say so out loud. Harry closed his eyes for 1 second. He said, "If I do this, if I remove everything, I need to know that it ends there. No further review, no further compliance flags, no more of this." William said, "If you separate completely, there is nothing left to review. That is how the mechanism works. It ends when the association ends." Harry said, "Then I will do it." The silence that followed those 4 words was the longest silence of the entire call. 22 seconds. Harry counted them without meaning to, the way a person counts the seconds between lightning and thunder. Us measuring the distance between the strike and its consequence, William said, "Are you certain?" Harry said, "I have been certain since 3 o'clock yesterday morning. I just needed to hear you say it was possible." William exhaled. It was not a sigh of relief. It was not a sigh of satisfaction. It was the exhale of a man letting go of something heavy that he had been carrying for a long time. The specific kind of release that does not feel like winning because it was never about winning. He said, "Take care of yourself, Harry." Harry said, "You too." The call ended at 10:10 in the evening, 23 minutes, no recording, no notes, no official record of any kind. Harry stood in the hallway for a long time after the line went dead. He did not move. He did not go back to the bedroom. He stood in the dark with his phone in his hand and the stars outside the window and the full weight of what he had just agreed to sitting across his shoulders like something that was heavy and right at the same time. Meghan appeared in the bedroom doorway. She had been awake. Of course she had. She looked at his face, and she did not ask who he had been talking to or what had been said. She could read the answer in the particular way he was standing, the posture of a man who had walked through a door and heard it close behind him. She crossed the hallway and stood beside him. She did not speak. She looked out the window at the same dark hills and the same impossible sky. After a long moment, she said, "Is it done?" He said, "Almost." She nodded. She took his hand, and for the first time in 4 days, the air in that house felt like something other than pressure. It felt like the specific calm that lives on the other side of a decision. Not peaceful exactly, not easy, but settled. The kind of settled that only comes when a person has stopped running from the thing they always knew they were going to have to face. Marcus Lavelle received a text message at 10:14 in the evening. 4 words from Harry's personal number. "Finish the statement draft." Marcus stared at those 4 words for a long moment. Then he opened his laptop, pulled up the document he had started 3 days ago in that Montecito kitchen, and began to write. He wrote for 2 hours without stopping. What he produced in those 2 hours would become, within 72 hours, one of the most discussed documents in the history of the British royal family. But that night, in a hotel room 12 minutes from Harry's house, it was just words on a screen. Careful, precise, irreversible words, drafted by a man who understood that the sentences he was writing were not just a statement. They were the closing line of a chapter that had been open since birth. And somewhere across the Atlantic, in an institution that did not react publicly to private decisions until it had decided exactly how to react, a particular office received a quiet notification that a call had taken place and that an outcome had been reached. No response was issued. No acknowledgement was sent. The institution simply noted the development and returned to its business, the way institutions always do. With the patient, unbothered rhythm of something that has outlasted every crisis it has ever faced and fully expects to outlast this one too. As Marcus slid the printed statement across the kitchen table at 8:23 in the morning. 4 paragraphs, 1 page. The kind of document that took 2 hours to write and a lifetime to earn the right to write. Marcus had printed it on plain white paper. No letterhead, no formatting, no design. Just words. Because the words were the only thing that mattered now, and dressing them up in anything else would have been a way of hiding from them. Harry picked it up. He read the first paragraph standing up. Then he pulled out the chair and sat down slowly, the way a person sits when the weight of what they are reading has made standing feel like too much effort. He read the second paragraph, the third, the fourth. He turned the page over as if checking for something on the other side. There was nothing on the other side. There never was going to be anything on the other side. He set it down. He said, "This is it." Marcus said, "That is it." Deja sat at the far end of the table, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup, watching Harry the way a person watches someone standing at the edge of something irreversible. Not to intervene, not to advise, but simply to bear witness. She had done her part. The architecture had been assessed, the options had been laid out, the strategic analysis had been completed. What was left now had nothing to do with strategy. Harry read the statement a second time, slower. The way you read something when you are not looking for errors but are looking for the feeling, the specific emotional truth of whether the words on the page match the words inside your chest. They did. The first paragraph confirmed his decision to voluntarily and permanently relinquish all remaining honorary designations, styles, and titles connected to the British royal family. The language was clean and unambiguous. No hedging, no diplomatic softening, no carefully constructed phrasing designed to leave a door open somewhere. The door was closed. The paragraph said so in plain English that any person in any country could read and understand without a translation. The second paragraph stated that the decision was made freely, from a position of clarity, and did not reflect animosity toward any member of his family or the institution itself. Marcus had written that paragraph 3 times before arriving at the version on the page. The first draft had been too cold, as the second had leaned too far into warmth that might have read as performance. The third was honest. Not warm, not cold, but honest. The honesty of a man who had made peace with a complicated truth. The third paragraph acknowledged the philanthropic mission that he and Meghan would continue to pursue, now operating from a foundation of full and unambiguous independence. No institutional association, no residual symbolic weight, just the work itself, standing on its own terms, measured by its own results. The fourth paragraph was 4 sentences long. Harry read those 4 sentences twice. He pressed his lips together. He set the paper down flat on the table and placed his palm over it. Not dramatically, just a quiet, physical gesture of confirmation. The gesture of a man placing his hand on something and saying, without words, "This is mine. This decision is mine. I am claiming it." Meghan walked into the kitchen. She looked at the paper under his hand. She looked at his face. She had read an early draft the evening before, had sat with it at the kitchen table after the children were in bed, had read it carefully and thoroughly, and had asked 2 specific questions about the language in the third paragraph, both of which Marcus had incorporated into the final version. She had not tried to change the decision. She had not tried to shape it or redirect it or soften its edges. She had done something harder and more important than any of that. She had let it be his. She said, "How do you feel?" He thought about the question honestly, not the diplomatic version of honest, the real version. Yet he said, "Like I have been holding a door shut for 4 years and I just let go of the handle." She nodded. She understood exactly what he meant. She sat down beside him. Marcus looked at his phone. "I need a release time. The legal restructuring can proceed independently, but the public statement, when do you want it to go out?" Harry said, "Tomorrow, morning, Pacific time." Marcus nodded. He made a note. He said, "Once it goes out, the response cycle will start within the hour. Every major outlet, every royal correspondent, every commentary platform. It is going to be loud." Harry said, "I know." Marcus said, "William's office will not respond publicly. Based on the conversation you had, they will let the statement stand without comment." Harry said, "I know that too." Marcus said, "And Rochelle believes the institutional review closes automatically once the formal separation is registered. No further compliance flags, no further mechanism. It ends." Harry said, "Good. One word. No elaboration. The specific economy of language that belongs to a person who has said everything that needed to be said and has arrived at the place where more words would only dilute the truth of the ones already spoken." Deja closed her laptop. She looked at Harry. She thought about everything she wanted to say, about the 11 months, about the framework, about the word clean, and what it had cost both of them to discover its limits. Yeah, she thought about San Francisco and standing ovations and the way momentum feels when it is real and the way it feels when you discover that something was moving against it the entire time. She said, "What we built still stands. 40% reduction in scope is not a failure. It is a foundation. And now that the separation is complete, we can build from it without anyone looking over our shoulder." Harry looked at her. He said, "Then let us build." 3 words. And inside those 3 words was everything that the past 5 days had been moving toward. Not a collapse, not a defeat, not the ending of something, but the clearing away of everything that had been preventing the real thing from beginning. At the moment after the storm when the air is sharp and clean and the ground is still wet but solid underfoot and the sky ahead is open in every direction. Marcus sent the statement to their legal team at 9:15 in the morning for final review. The legal team returned it at 2:47 in the afternoon with 1 minor formatting correction and no substantive changes. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Marcus filed the formal notification with the relevant institutional registry. A procedural requirement that generated no headlines, triggered no press alerts, and produced no public response of any kind. Just a filing, just a record. The quiet administrative confirmation that a decision made in private had now been registered in the formal language of institutions. That night, Harry and Meghan had dinner with the children. No advisors, no phones on the table. No strategy discussions, no timeline reviews, no communication briefings. Just dinner. The specific, ordinary, irreplaceable ordinariness of a family sitting around a table in their own home, eating food and talking about small things. The kind of small things that are not small at all when you understand what it costs to be able to sit still long enough to notice them. Harry looked at his children across the table. He thought about birthright, about identity, about what it means to hand something to the people who come after you. Not a title, not a designation, not a symbolic association with an institution built across centuries, but something simpler and more durable. The model of a person who looked at an impossible choice and did not choose the easier path. Who chose instead the path that was true? That was the inheritance. Not the name, not the history, not the architecture of something ancient and powerful that had never been fully his to begin with. The inheritance was the choice. The morning the statement was released, the world responded exactly the way Marcus had predicted. Loud, fast, immediate. Every major outlet picked it up within 40 minutes. Royal correspondents delivered their analysis with the particular breathless urgency of people who had been waiting for a story like this for years. Social media divided itself into its familiar camps. Those who saw liberation and those who saw recklessness. Those who understood and those who chose not to. William's office issued no statement. The palace issued no statement. The institution absorbed the news the way it absorbed everything, with the deep, as practiced silence of something that has outlasted every disruption it has ever faced and intends to outlast this one too. And in a kitchen in Montecito, California, Harry sat at the table with his second cup of coffee and read the coverage on his phone. He read it the way you read a story about someone else, with a kind of detached clarity, a distance that had nothing to do with indifference and everything to do with the specific piece of a person who has already made the decision and no longer needs the world's verdict to confirm it. He set his phone face down on the table. He looked out the window. The California morning was doing what California mornings do, arriving with effortless light, golden and indifferent, making everything look like it was going to be fine. This time, he let himself believe it. Not because the hard part was over. The hard part is never over. There would be new reviews and new challenges and new mornings that arrived golden and delivered something difficult underneath. He knew that. He had always known that. But there is a difference between facing difficulty inside a life that is yours and facing it inside a life that belongs, in part, to something else. There is a difference between carrying weight that you chose and carrying weight that was placed on you before you were old enough to consent to it. Harry understood that difference now in a way he had not understood it 5 days ago. Not because the statement had changed something external, because the decision had changed something internal. And that was the thing no compliance memo could flag, no institutional review could assess, and no press coverage could accurately describe the private, internal shift of a person who has stopped waiting for permission to be exactly who they are. He finished his coffee. He rinsed the cup. He walked out of the kitchen and into the rest of his life. The palace never did release a statement. Gerald Ashworth's email chain went quiet the day the separation was formally registered and did not generate another message after that. Rochelle Okafor filed her closing analysis 9 days later. A clean, procedural document confirming that the constitutional adjacency review had been resolved and closed. Marcus Lavelle flew back to Washington 2 weeks after the statement dropped and returned to the work he had always done, managing the communications of people navigating impossible situations with imperfect tools. Deja Whitmore spent 6 weeks rebuilding the framework from its foundation. She did not start from scratch. She started from 40%, from the solid, proven, legally clean core of what she had originally built, and she built upward from there, carefully, without the institutional weight that had triggered the review, and without the word clean anywhere in her notes. She used a different word now: true. What they were building was not clean in the sense of frictionless or uncomplicated. It was true. True to what Harry and Meghan had set out to do. True to the people they were building it for. True to the decision that had been made at a kitchen table in Montecito at 8:23 in the morning, when a man placed his palm over a single printed page and claimed something as his own. Some stories end with a verdict. Some end with a victory. Yes, this one ended with something quieter and more permanent than either. The moment a person steps fully into the life they chose and discovers, for the first time, that the ground beneath their feet is solid. Not because everything worked out perfectly, because they finally stopped standing on ground that had never belonged to them. And that was enough. That was more than enough. If this story moved you, if it made you think about your own choices and your own inheritance and what it truly costs to step into a life that is fully yours, then this channel is exactly where you belong. Subscribe right now and turn on every notification, because the stories we tell here are the ones that live underneath the headlines. The ones about identity and courage and the price of real freedom. Share this with someone in your life who is standing at their own crossroads right now, someone who needs to hear that choosing yourself is not reckless, it is necessary. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us what part of this story hit closest to home. Tell us what you would have done. Tell us what you are thinking. This community is built on those conversations, and every comment you leave is a chance to inspire someone else who is reading it. We will see you in the next story.